What's up, guys? Welcome to episode 2 of Rock the Dragon, a Dragon Ball Daima podcast. I'm your host, Tim Bridgewater. Hey, we are now officially 3 episodes into this new podcast, if you count episode 0. And then, of course, it's episode 1. This will be episode 3 of the actual podcast, while we are covering episode 2 of Dragon Ball Daima. Just in case that's a little bit confusing for anyone, but it should be all laid out nice and neatly there, right there for you on Spotify and or Apple Podcasts. So if you're a little bit confused about anything here, I talk about all of it in episode 0. And then, of course, there's an episode 1 before this one. So I'm going to skip a lot of that preliminary stuff where I give the history of this and that and the other. There are 2 other episodes you can go back just in case you missed those. You can get caught up on everything here, but I will remind you of this, that once again, my name is Tim Bridgewater and I hosted a podcast before this one called Rock the Dragon, a Dragon Ball Super podcast. So when I found out that there was going to be a new Dragon Ball show called Dragon Ball Daima, I decided to jump back out into the podcasting world and cover this show as well. So that's what you can expect here. Every single episode, we're going to do a deep dive into every episode of Dragon Ball Daima. At least every episode. And, you know, I'll give it a few episodes and see if people are still listening or not. And if no one's listening, maybe we'll stop at some point. But for now, we'll just keep going with every episode. Speaking of Spotify, Apple Podcasts, I have a couple quick mentions I want to make here. I want to remind you guys that if you listen on Spotify, and this is something that I'm having to get used to, if you listen on Spotify, you can leave comments on every episode. So you scroll down after this episode is posted, you'll be able to comment on this specific episode. So if there's anything you want to say and make any remarks about the podcast, any remarks about the episode itself of Dragon Ball Daima, a quick and easy way is to jump down there and leave a comment. There are other listeners that are leaving comments as well, so you can comment and reply to each other, etc. We did not have the luxury of this with my previous podcast because that podcast was not being hosted on Spotify at the time. Now it is. So if you want to go back and comment on something on that podcast, you can too, directly through Spotify. And so this is something new and exciting I'm kind of trying out here with this new podcast. There's not really a way, to my knowledge, that you can do that through Apple Podcasts as of now. So this is just mainly for people who use Spotify. This is just a function that they have. Also, with some of the episodes, I'll be posting polls so you guys can vote. Right. So let's just say, for example, we come up with I come across a random sort of idea, topic, subject during the actual podcast episode. Make sure you check the poll section under that episode because I may post a poll to get you guys thoughts on something. Just for example, I posted a poll for episode 0 where I was asking you, and once again, I'm not expecting a ton of reactions here because this podcast is still brand new. So right now it's going to be barely anyone commenting on anything, but I just want to let you guys know that you can do it and it is there. So if you're going to be there anyway, make sure you check for a poll. Might be a fun and easy way for you to engage with the podcast if you're someone who wants to be active and be interactive, but maybe you don't want to leave a comment or send an email in. So this will be a quick and easy way for you to kind of react. So just for fun, just as a test, for episode 0, I posted a poll that says, how do you feel about our heroes being turned into kids? Okay. And that poll is now closed, but we got 66.7% of people that said they hated the idea and 33.3% that said they loved it. That's pretty much what I expected. Honestly, I wasn't expecting anyone to say that they loved it. I was expecting nothing but hate. But, it's okay to be a little bit open-minded about it. I wouldn't say I love it. I talked about it quite a bit in episode 0, but I was at least open to it to see what they're going to do with it. And on episode 1, I posted a poll there as well. This one was a little bit more interesting. Okay. So if you listen to episode 1 of the podcast, there was during our email segment, which is called What Are You Saying? So if you want to send me an email because you have any questions or comments about the episode or the podcast or Dragon Ball Z or something that you want me to actually break down and dive into a little bit, you can send me an email for that. And one of the questions kind of led to this discussion about what if Gohan and Goku had fused with the Potara earrings instead of Goku and Vegeta. Because if you remember in Dragon Ball Z, there was a moment where that was the intention until Gohan dropped the earring, and then they brought Vegeta back, and he ended up fusing with Goku instead. So I just, for shits and giggles, during that episode, sort of tore around with the idea of what would their name be, right? What would Goku and Gohan's fusion name be? And I threw around a couple possibilities on the podcast, and I thought it'd be fun to just do a poll on Spotify to see what you guys thought. So I basically provided 4 options. Okay, number 1 option was Kuhan. Okay, Kuhan. Number 2 is one that I don't think I'd heard anyone else say, and that's Go-Go. Okay. Come on, you gotta admit Go-Go is kind of funny, right? Then option number 3 was Go-Hato. Go-Hato. Okay, if you know the history of Vegito and how that name came about, you'll get why Go-Hato would also work in that scenario. And then number 4 was Kakahan. Okay, obviously I wasn't being entirely serious with these. I just thought it'd be funny and fun to fucking make a joke about it. So 75% of you guys said that Kuhan would be your favorite out of those 4 choices. And the other 25% said that Kakahan would be your favorite. I think one of those is clearly better than the other. I'm gonna let you guys take a guess at which one it is, but you know, it's just fun stuff like this. So if you want to just participate in these little polls, and I'll come on here and I'll talk about the results. I can't promise that I'm going to do a poll for every single episode, but you know, I'll do them whenever it feels right, and then I feel like I have a good subject to kind of make a poll about. But make sure you check that section out if you're listening through Spotify, okay? Now, speaking of that, I did have a couple of comments that I just wanted to address really, really quickly on Spotify as well. This isn't necessarily something I'm planning on doing for every single episode of the podcast, but if it's something that's mentioned in the comments that I feel is worth mentioning on the podcast, then I may bring it up here as well. Okay, so for one, I just want to shout out Bo, who left me a comment about 4 days ago that says, "It is nice to have you back making podcast episodes. I always enjoy listening to your stuff when I'm bored. It makes me unbored. Especially because Dragon Ball stuff is so entertaining and because you have good information surrounding the show. Keep it up." Bo, thank you so much for saying that. That's basically a review / motivational comment, which I love to receive. So thank you for saying that. I don't know if you and I have interacted before or if we've spoken. Your name doesn't specifically ring a bell right now. But I'll tell you this, I love to hear from new listeners, or if you're not a new listener, if this is your first time saying anything, I love to hear from you guys too. So I appreciate you saying that, Bo. Thank you so much for being a listener. Also, Brent, one of my longtime listeners, left a comment and says, "I don't understand in this day that the dub can't come out the same release time as the sub. It's not the 90s or early 2000s anymore." Laughy face emoji. Now, what Brent is kind of referencing there is that I did a little bit of a segment on the previous episode of the podcast where I kind of talked about the presentation of Daima versus the presentation of Super and Z and release, the releases of both, network versus streaming, etc. And I feel like this is something I also talked about on the previous episode a little bit, and that is the fact that these dubs tend to come out after the sub, right? And while it seems to be getting shorter and shorter in between both versions each time, we're still behind, right? The dub version of Dragon Ball Daima is still behind the sub of these of Dragon Ball Daima. I'm sorry. There's a lot of talk. Okay, Dragon Ball Daima, Dragon Ball Super, dub, and sub. The dub is behind the sub, okay, when it comes to Dragon Ball Daima. But we've also talked about the fact that this is not something that is necessarily new, right? This happened with Dragon Ball Super as well. Obviously, it happened with Dragon Ball Z, clearly, because we didn't really get that until 15 years after it was out in Japan. So there's nothing new about that. But Brent, to your point, technologically, right, in terms of the technological advancements about, pertaining to dubs and what we can do now with technology and all that, you're absolutely right. I can't think of any valid reason in terms of technology why the sub and the dubs can't come out at the same time. Because theoretically, all they would have to do is, as soon as they get the scripts for the episode, they share those scripts with Funimation. And then Funimation can start on the dub at the same time as the sub, right? And then we can finally get some simultaneous dub releases so no one has to wait, months or years to get caught up or to see it. Now, obviously, there's a lot more to it than that, right? And I think most of those reasons are business related, those kinds of things. I would say number one, and this is something I mentioned on previous podcasts too, I'm willing to bet that a big part of this is just the fact that Toei wants Japan to get Dragon Ball first, right? Why not? It's a Japanese property. They own it. They're largely responsible for it and the creation of it, and Akira Toriyama and the Japanese fans. So a part of it is probably them just saying, hey, we want our people to get it first because we made it, So I would imagine that it's a part of that too. The other part of it would be something else I also kind of mentioned on the previous episode, and that's the more businessy sort of perspectives, right? Where just business wise, it just makes more sense to make us wait for it, because if they release it all at once, I think it's fair to say that a lot of us, not all of us, but I think it's fair to say that a lot of us would only watch one or the other, right? If we could have both the sub and the dub at the same exact time, most of us would probably just pick one, whichever one we like more. It's like, if you're a bigger fan of the sub, you'll watch that. If you're a bigger fan of the dub, you'll watch that. Obviously, that's not across the board, but I feel like it's safe to assume that. Whereas if you break them apart, many of you guys have already been watching the sub, damn it. And now you're going to watch the dub because it's a separate release. They made you wait for it, and now you're curious to see, I wonder how the dub is going to handle this. I wonder how, the English voice cast is going to handle this episode, and stuff like that. Once again, it's just about making it feel more special by having, an English dub come out a little bit later and so forth. So I'm sure there's a lot of, and Brent, I'm sure you knew all of that, but I just felt like it needed a little bit more elaboration as to why. It's just, I don't think it's as simple as it coming, them both just coming out at the same time. Because you're right, it's not the 90s or the 2000s anymore. So technologically, those kinds of excuses don't really stand anymore. So I think now it's just more of a business sort of, situation where they're just trying to, make it work by making us wait a little bit, having a little bit of a teaser, giving Japan priority, and etc. So I did just want to touch upon that. Okay, sorry, I went way too deeply into that. If you happen to like the music at the beginning of this episode, because listen, I'll mention this. I've been having a hard time figuring out exactly how I want to intro this podcast. I'm sure you guys notice things sound a little bit different here than Rock the Dragon and Dragon Ball Super podcast. I didn't want to use the exact same music that I used there. I didn't want to use the exact same intro. This is a different podcast. I wanted to feel a little bit different. And of course, with episode 0 and episode 1, I did this sort of Dragon Ball Super recap because it made, it was something fun that I thought about, and it seemed to make sense for at least those 2 episodes to do that. But I wasn't going to make you guys listen to that every single episode, right? So this one, you'll notice something a little bit different. This show is called Rock the Dragon. I'm a big rock music fan. Some of you guys probably know that I actually sing in a rock band, or I sang in a rock band, and we recorded music. And that is one of the songs that we recorded. And that song is called Air Castle by a band called Swords at Sundown. So that is my song that you're hearing at the beginning of the episode. So if that happens to be a song that you're curious about and you think it sounds cool, you'd like to hear the full version of it, it's also on Spotify. So if you look up Swords at Sundown and the song Air Castle, you'll find it there. So I don't know if that's going to be the permanent intro or not. I I'm just for now. I'm just kind of experimenting with that kind of stuff. So I definitely wanted to mention that. I also wanted to mention the fact that obviously there's a new look to the podcast, right? I didn't mention this in episode 0 or episode 1, but now I have an actual logo for the podcast. So if you look at the podcast art for this podcast and you look at the podcast art for my previous one, they look nothing alike. Okay. I had a lot of fun with the previous podcast art. You know, I'm on the cover. My name is on the cover. For a long time, I had Super Saiyan Blue Goku on the cover. I had the Dragon Ball Super logo on it. And over time, I realized it was just a matter of time before Toei, caught wind of it and sent me a cease and desist or something that made me take that shit down. So I just decided to just take it down myself. So now you'll find the podcast art for that podcast very similar to the one that I had before, but there shouldn't be any trademarkable objects in it anymore. Okay. And with this one, I just decided to just come up with my own logo in general. So I hope you guys dig it. That was my idea. Obviously, I had a hand in creating that. I used some AI assistance in some places. I also had a friend of mine who's a graphic designer kind of help me out with some of it too. So that is now the official logo of Rock the Dragon podcast. Okay. So I hope for anyone who's wondering if there are two different podcasts called Rock the Dragon because they look differently, it's the exact same host, and that's me, Tim Bridgewater. I just don't have my name on this one. Maybe that'll change in the future. I don't know, but I hope you guys dig it. Okay, so we don't have a ton of things to really get into on this episode. I did get a new review on iTunes. Sorry, iTunes, man. It's been a while, guys. I'm sorry. Okay, Apple Podcasts. Okay, and I did just want to take a quick moment to shout out Giant Steps on Apple Podcasts. Says, yes, 5 stars. So happy Tim has decided to revive Rock the Dragon. His podcasts are always entertaining and well produced. Can't wait to hear more. Giant Steps, thank you so much for saying that. Thank you so much for the 5-star rating. Thank you. And I thank you guys for kind of bearing with me as I try to get back into podcasting. I feel like when I'm recording these things, I always feel like I sound like a dumbass, especially in the first couple of times, the first couple of episodes. And then I listen back to it and I'm like, no, I guess this is okay. So if you guys don't notice, then I guess I'm doing a good job. Okay. So yeah, John Steps, thank you so much for saying that. If you'd like to leave me a review, head over to Apple Podcasts, leave a review there on the new podcast, as well as the old one if you never had a chance to do that. One more comment here I got from the Instagram page. I do want to remind you that I do have an Instagram at Rock the Dragon Podcast. You guys should really head over there and follow me because there's been some activity over there. There's been quite the activity. I now, I can't promise I'm going to keep doing this, but there have been some video clips from episode 1 of the podcast that I have shared on that page. Okay, so some of these topics that you've heard me talk about in episode 1, there's a video version of me talking about some specific topics on Instagram. And I think I'm just going to keep sharing those as long as I'm able to do it, just to try to help spread word about the podcast, hopefully get some more people to kind of tune in and check it out. So I hope you guys will take the time to go and follow me on Instagram. Speaking of Instagram, I got a message over there from Adrian. Adrian, long-time listener here. Adrian says, LOL, I'm extremely happy you're back and podcasting. I just wanted you to know that I would be in favor of any other podcast in the future, whether that is the live action Avatar or anything else. I don't have any questions about the show yet. My question is, how long does it take you to edit an episode of the podcast? Just general curiosity. You don't have to add this to your next podcast episode or anything. I'm not expecting you to. Just some of my thoughts. Much love. Keep going. Adrian, thank you so much. Yeah, I understand you weren't necessarily intending for me to read this, but I figured I don't have a ton of other topics to talk about on this episode. So instead of me just jumping directly into the episode talk, I figured I'd just, address your message on the podcast. So you asked about how long does it take for me to edit the podcast? That really depends on if there are things that I feel like need to be cut out if there's any dead air that I feel like needs to be cut out, if I need to stop and go piss or something in the middle of the episode. I don't do a lot of editing in terms of the content of the podcast. You guys have been listening to me for a long time. You know, sometimes I'll cough on here, I'll clear my throat, and I'm not trying to be annoying. It's just, it's a pain in the ass to go back and cut that little stuff out when it's not that big of a deal, right? So there's not a ton of editing. Now, I'll tell you this, the editing process has definitely been shortened quite a bit ever since I switched over to Spotify for podcast hosting. I talked about this in previous episodes before, so I won't get into it now. But you know how much work you end up having to do to submit your podcast and get it online kind of depends on who's hosting it, how you're hosting it, where is your RSS feed coming from, you know, all that kind of stuff. So I would say now it takes a lot less time than it took with the previous podcast, because now I'm using Spotify to host, which means they're kind of taking a lot of the work away from me, which is great. So now I can just kind of sit down, record, you know, move my music around a little bit, put an intro, outro, export, upload to Spotify, title it, and it's out. So not a lot. So I don't know why you were asking that. I don't know if maybe you were considering podcasting. I'll say this. Podcasting is easier now than it seems like it's ever been. So if you got something you want to talk about and you feel like people might want to listen to it, I say go for it, man. It's not nearly as hard as it once was when I first started. Okay, now that being said, I do have one actual email here for our email segment called What Are You Saying? So send me an email at rockthedragonpodcast@gmail.com if you'd like me to read your email for our email segment. Okay, I do have one here from Childish Villain, and Childish writes, Dear Tim, longtime listener, first time up to date. I'm actually a really huge fan of your podcasts. I found the OG Rock the Dragon podcast nearly around when you were finishing up with the episodes. I binged the entire podcast before you finished it though, but I never wrote in, mostly because I watched the sub and I was done with my watch for a long time and I didn't feel like I had much substance to add by sending in an email. And then coming to the realization you truly weren't coming back to cover the manga or anything sucked, LOL. But then hearing the recent episode, hearing you were coming back with not only a new podcast, but there was already an episode to listen to, is a great start to the year. I will definitely be keeping up and sending in more emails with actual questions, LOL. I also listen to Republic City Report, being that I'm an Avatar fan, have been since the OG, and I'm one of the people who think there's an argument and that Korra did a lot of things better. Arguably, the whole show I think may be better. Okay. Arguably, the whole show I think I may find better, not by much and maybe not at all, but it could be argued. Keep up the great, amazing quality podcast. Whatever you post, I will listen, bro. Double D. Parentheses, first time ever writing an email, finally starting to feel old at 26. Well, I'm going to refer to you as Double D, since that's what that's the signature you left for the email. So Double D, thank you so much for writing in. It's amazing to me that every time I get an email from a listener that I've never talked to before, and they're saying, hey, I've been listening since the beginning or for years, or I binged your podcast and I just never said anything about it. It honestly just blows my mind. It blows my mind. I've had a few people write in and have said, we binged your podcast. And I'm like, how the hell did you guys, at what point, what episode did you, because man, there's like 146 episodes of that podcast, and I know some of you guys have listened to every single one, and I'm just thinking, whoo, man, I don't know if I could do it, but I'm thankful and grateful for you guys for doing that. And I'm always glad when you jump in later and decide to send me an email. I like to know that people are still listening. It never hurts. It only helps motivate me to do more stuff the more you guys communicate. So I definitely appreciate you. Let's see if we could touch upon a couple of things you mentioned in here. Yeah, I know, right? I've gotten a few listeners over the episodes that have asked me to cover the manga and stuff like that, and I'm not gonna go into exactly why. I mean, I give you the short answer, and that is I'm a fan of the anime. I like to talk about the anime. If I read Dragon Ball Super manga, then when the anime finally drops, if it comes back, I'll already be spoiled on the anime. And I just like to watch it in real time and just be surprised and just experience it with everyone else for the first time, as an anime fan. I don't do much reading these days, so yeah, I just never really considered covering the manga. But I'm glad you were disappointed that I didn't, because that's a good sign. That's good for me. You also listen to Republic City Report. Man, thank you. Thank you for saying that. For those who don't know, I hosted a podcast called Republic City Report where I talked about The Legend of Korra, which is, of course, the sequel series to Avatar: The Last Airbender. And that was a podcast that I did before I did Rock the Dragon and Dragon Ball Super podcast. Okay? I have some news regarding Republic City Report, but I don't know if I'm ready to share it just yet because I'm still in the process of making it happen. Okay? So I'll revisit that when and if that process is complete. Okay. Sorry, teaser. Man, you threw out some really big. There's some big some hot takes in there, huh? You said I'm one of the people who think there's an argument and that Korra did a lot of things better, and arguably the whole show you think might be better. Ooh. Now, listen, I'm not going to get into it with you on that because it's a whole can of worms, and we're here to talk about Dragon Ball. And I'm not saying that I disagree with you. I'm just saying that that's a hot take, brother or sister. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if you're how you identify, but I'll say this: nothing really tops Avatar: The Last Airbender, in my opinion. So I definitely don't think Korra's better, but I could see how some people might have that perspective. I love Korra. Obviously, I loved it enough to do a whole podcast where I talked about it. So I didn't want to just gloss over that comment because that's a pretty big statement there. Anyway, you said you're going to continue up and follow up with more emails and questions as the podcast develops. I look forward to hearing from you again. So by all means, feel free to write me anytime. If you guys have anything you'd like to say, send me an email at rockthedragonpodcast@gmail.com for my email segment called What Are You Saying? I think I covered all the preliminary stuff. I don't envision this being a very, very long episode of the podcast, so let's just go ahead and jump into the episode talk for this week. So, of course, this episode of Rock the Dragon, a Dragon Ball Daima podcast, is going to cover episode 2 of Dragon Ball Daima, titled Glorio. Now, the first thing I want to mention here about this episode is that it just jumps right into it, right? No recap, no previously on Dragon Ball Daima. This kind of thing, I think, just kind of further supports what I talked about in the previous episode, and that is that the presentation of Daima is very, very different in many different ways. And I break this down during a whole segment in the previous episode. But this just kind of further supports that. There's no recap at the beginning of this episode, with the narrator and all that kind of stuff. I think we're all kind of used to that, okay? Especially with Dragon Ball Z. Very, very, very known for that. Dragon Ball Super did it. And this is only episode 2 of Dragon Ball Daima, so it's not to say that they won't still do it, because they handled episode 1 differently. Episode 1 didn't have opening credits. They just did a recap and jumped into the episode. And now this one, there's no recap and there are credits. So who knows? Episode 3, maybe they'll start doing a recap. Maybe they felt like there's not enough that has happened yet to have a recap yet, right? Maybe they'll wait a couple episodes to jump into that. But I'm just pointing out things that further support this idea that I have that the presentation of Dragon Ball Daima is just a lot more different. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. So we just jump back into the episode. We just jump directly into it. And man, I have to say this. First of all, we start the episode off exactly where we left off the previous one, and that is newly crowned Goma just made a wish to turn all of our heroes into kids, which I'm not going to get into all of that. We'll talk more about it in a minute. But of course, they already kind of went out of their way in the previous episode to remind us that at this point in time, Shinron could grant 3 wishes. So they're totally going into this expecting to be able to grant, to request 3 wishes. Well, after Goma makes his first wish, Shinron just decides to tell him, hey, I reserve that for my regulars. Matter of fact, his actual quote is, that is a privilege. That is a privilege reserved for my regulars. Of which, had I not laughed my ass off immediately when he said that, I would be a little bit upset by it. Okay, well, Tim, why would you be upset? Well, obviously, this isn't something we've seen Shinron do before, right? Don't quote me on that, because I don't remember everything. Obviously, we've seen Shinron have a sense of humor before. That's something that's been somewhat established. We've seen him get embarrassed and stuff like that. But in terms of the rules of the Dragon Balls and how many wishes you're supposed to have, I don't think we've ever seen him just decide to only grant 1 wish instead of 3. So the very sort of continuity focused version of Tim Bridgewater wants to get mad about that. But if it wasn't so funny to me, I would be mad about it. But I thought it was hilarious. I just thought it was funny. I literally laughed out loud. I literally said, what the fuck did he just say? Did he just say he's not going to grant these other wishes because that's reserved for his regulars? And he's like, well, you're new here and I don't know you, so I'm only going to grant 1 wish. It's like, okay. Now, listen, if I really want to dive into that, we could open up a whole treasure trove of plot holes, right? And contradictions by him just deciding how many wishes he wants to grant. But that's not going to get us anywhere. Okay. This is the Dragon Ball world. There's some stuff you just kind of have to let slide. And even though I might point out a lot of this stuff, I'm only pointing it out because it's there and it's an inconsistency and because it's a contradiction. And I do a podcast where I talk about this stuff. But does that mean I necessarily have a problem with it, or I don't like it, or I don't think it's funny? Of course not. I thought it was hilarious. And it is what it is. I thought it was funny. And honestly, I'm willing to forgive a lot of things if you make me laugh. Okay? And I just thought that was funny. Because he's like, wait, I thought we had 2 more wishes. And Shinron's just like, peace out. No, the fuck you don't. I'm gone. Okay? So, of course, then we rejoin our heroes. We get to see Krillin and Goku and Vegeta come crashing out of the sky as kids. And we kind of get this reveal that it's not just the 3 of them. It's not just Goku, Vegeta, Krillin. They show us some of the other characters too. We see Piccolo. We see Android 18. We see the Ox King, Yamcha, Oolong, Puar, Supreme Kai, Kibito. Basically, everyone that was present at this party has been turned into kids. Okay? And this is where, there's that reveal. They all kind of come to the realization. And then we get our first look at the opening credit sequence. If you watch the English dub like I do, it's your first time seeing it. Okay? Now, if you recall in episode 1, I talked quite a bit about the presentation of Dragon Ball Daima and how I feel like it's just a little bit less. The presentation of the English dub of Dragon Ball Daima and how I feel like it's just a little bit less special when compared to Dragon Ball Super, Dragon Ball GT, and Dragon Ball Z. And I used examples like the fact that the title card was still in Japanese. That on Crunchyroll, this is basically just listed as a dub, like just any other dub of any other anime. And this just further supports that perception that I had of it, because we don't even get an English version of the opening theme song. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like that's the first time that's happened with any Dragon Ball series, right? I could be mistaken about the original Dragon Ball. I don't remember exactly what happened there with the opening song. I feel like they kept a lot of that. I feel like Dragon Ball kept all the Japanese music and all that other stuff, and they just went back and did the voices. But certainly Dragon Ball Z, we got Rock the Dragon, the namesake of this podcast, and then we got more as Funimation came in with the, with their new actors and Bruce Faulconer and all of that, and we got basically not an English version of the original theme, but the English version got its own theme music. And with Dragon Ball Super, we got an English version of the Japanese theme called Chozetsu Dynamic, of which I did a cover of along with my buddy Nick Capone, aka American Avenue, which you can still find on Spotify and and Apple Music. Chozetsu Dynamic, American Avenue featuring Tim Bridgewater. We did a rock version of that song, and in that song I did the first verse in English and I did the second verse in Japanese, which clearly meant there was an English version of it. And if you watched it on Adult Swim or Cartoon Network, you heard that. You heard that English version of it. We don't even get that here. And it's probably largely tied into the fact that this is straight to streaming. So if you're not going to have a network debut of a show, why, I guess, put forth the extra money to re-record an English version of the theme song? Because now this is being presented as just another dub. And this is what I talked about in the previous episode. All the credits are still in Japanese. Okay. The music is in Japanese. And I gotta admit, there's something cool about that, because it makes it feel more like the subbed version, which that is, as much as some of us may not like the Japanese voices, that's the original version. I mean, that is Dragon Ball. That is what it's intended to sound and look like. So this gives us something that's more accurate and more close to that, because we're getting to experience all the music and everything the way it was, just with English voices, which is how it is for most anime that's dubbed into English. So it's interesting to see that Dragon Ball is now being kind of treated that way. And once again, I think that Dragon Ball Daima going straight to streaming has a lot to do with that. So let's just talk about these credits. I don't want to get too specific about the credits, because if you look historically, if you look too deeply into the opening credits of these series, there'll be spoilers in there. And I don't want to be spoiled on something that hasn't happened yet because I'm looking too closely at the credits. Okay, I'm like, oh, who's this character? Who's this person? Well, who's that? That looks like so-and-so. Let me just chill back and just wait for the episode, and I'll be introduced to it like everyone else. So I'm not going to do a deep dive into the credits, but I'll say this. They look amazing. Look incredible. Okay, so then the episode starts. We don't get a title card. The title is just in the bottom corner of the screen. I don't know. There seems to be a lot of inconsistency here. They're kind of jumping around, but those are nitpicks. That doesn't really matter, right? So we pick up with Goma, Neva, and I knew Degasu, right? Degasu, which means probably Degasu. No, sorry, it's probably Degasu in Japanese, and it's Degasu in English because they fuck things up for some reason. Something I talked a lot about on the previous episode was how that I had a hard time seeing from Goma's perspective how turning our heroes into kids was going to make them less of a threat. Now, obviously, generally speaking, you would think a child version of anything is going to be less dangerous than an adult version, right? And that makes perfect sense. But in the Dragon Ball world, they've also established the fact that kids can be very, very powerful. And just because you're small doesn't mean you're weak. Just because you're skinny doesn't mean you're weak. Just because you're buff doesn't mean you're strong. It's just that kind of doesn't matter. Power has to do with your ki in this world. So to me, it was like, well, I guess we'll see what happens. But to me, I just didn't buy it as a good reason to make them, kids again, to make them less of a threat. Now, I will say this. They did a pretty good job this episode of reminding us that your body, your physical body, plays a really big role in how you channel your ki and your abilities and your martial arts techniques and your training in the Dragon Ball world. And I say they reminded us of that because that is a thing that they established in Dragon Ball Z. And that was an aspect of it that I wasn't really seeing at first. And I didn't really consider, but now I'm considering it. So I think they did a pretty good job of that, because all of a sudden we get a very, very cute little baby version of Dende. And I will say this: they've already kind of sort of created a new plot hole here, because they've established that some of these characters maintain their current mindset and their current personalities and their current knowledge, but they're just in a kid's body. Like Goku and Vegeta are still Goku and Vegeta, right? They're just smaller. But then some of them revert to like babies, like Dende. So that's a little bit inconsistent. I mean, it seems to me like they should all be able to maintain their current selves. They just be in smaller bodies. But with the younger ones, they just decided to go ahead and just make them babies, I guess, like mentally as well, because Dende's just sucking his thumb. Now they decide to go ahead and kidnap Dende, just in case they need him for ransom or something like that, as a bargaining chip, etc. We go back to our heroes. We see a wide shot of everyone. Chi-Chi, Bulma have also been turned into kids. Goten and Trunks are babies now, because that was a part of the wish, that whoever were already children, they're just babies now. Okay. Somehow they got put in baby clothing too. I don't recall that being a part of the wish, but somehow Trunks now has this little baby hat on. He's got a bib on, and okay, whatever, just a small little nitpick there. But what's not clear to me is that Goten and Trunks are talking to each other in this scene. So I don't know if they're using telepathy here or what. Because we do know that telepathy is a thing in Dragon Ball, but it's something that's only really been used very, very sparingly in certain situations. I don't think that they've established that Goten and Trunks can do it, but I'm not going to nitpick it. I think it's just supposed to be fun. It's just supposed to be a fun little thing so we can have them react to each other. And so I guess we're just hearing their inner thoughts, but the way it plays out on screen is if they're talking to one another as babies. Whatever. If you watch Look Who's Talking, remember those movies? then this is a thing. Apparently babies can talk to each other in baby talk. So maybe that's what it's supposed to be. So I got to say, it's very, very fun and very, very interesting to see and hear our heroes as kids. And I didn't know how I was going to feel about this when I first saw it in the trailer. But now that we're in it and I'm hearing the voices, I got to say it's not that bad. I really like Krillin's voice, and I know that for the most part, these are completely different voice actors doing the voices of these heroes at this point. So this is not Sean Schemmel and Christopher Sabat doing kid voices. These are different actors. And I didn't know how to feel about that, because it's very, very tricky to say, hey, we're going to take these characters that have already been established and we know what they sound like. Okay. We already know what they sound like. And now we have to maintain that adult personality and way of speaking, but make it come out of a kid's body with a kid's voice. And that couldn't have been easy to do. And I have to say, I feel like they did a pretty good job here. I think a standout for me is Master Roshi. I feel like he sounds just like Master Roshi, but he's just like a little kid, I'd imagine some of these voices were easier to do than others. Krillin has a very, very weird voice anyway, with Sonny Strait doing the adult version of him for so long. But I gotta say, I kind of like it. I like Junior, little Piccolo, little Vegeta. I think that they're kind of doing a pretty good job maintaining the consistency of the way that those characters talk while being kids. And of course, the legendary Stephanie Nadolny as Kid Goku is always a pleasure to hear. Now, obviously, I haven't seen the rest of the series, so I don't know how this is going to turn out. But I feel like Gohan is not going to be involved in Daima at all. I mean, because for one thing, he's not present when all of this took place, though technically, according to Goma's wish, Gohan should have also been turned into a child, because all he said was those who defeated Majin Buu and their friends. So that 100% should include Gohan, right? I mean, if Mr. Satan is included in there and Chi-Chi is included in there, then certainly Gohan would be included in there as someone who fought Buu. But I don't feel like we're going to see him because we haven't, right? And the pace at which this adventure is taking place is happening so quickly to where it's like Gohan doesn't even have a chance to get involved in this. But something that I thought about is that if Gohan does show up as a kid, what's his voice going to sound like? Because we already have Stephanie Nadolny doing the voice of Kid Goku in this show. Now, if you're wondering what I mean by that, Stephanie Nadolny also did the voice of Kid Gohan in the original Funimation run of Dragon Ball Z. Okay, not Dragon Ball Z Kai. That's a different actor. Okay, that was Colleen Klinkenbeard. But Stephanie Nadolny is the one that most of us are familiar with as Gohan. So if Kid Gohan showed up, which I gotta admit, I really would have liked that, because with Gohan, it would have been different, right? Like, to see Gohan be a kid again would be much more impactful for us because we're used to seeing him like that. So for that, would have been just like a little bit of a throwback. It's like, oh guys, like here, like Kid Gohan is back, for temporarily. But that voice is already being used to voice Kid Goku, so I don't know how they would have done that. And I'm assuming Colleen Klinkenbeard is just out of the picture now, completely. I'm assuming that. So I don't know. It'd be interesting to see if Gohan shows up in this, but that was just something I was thinking about while watching the episode. Now, kind of going back to what I was talking about earlier, where they're doing a pretty good job of reminding us, okay, so them being turned into kids does make them less threatening. Not because they're kids, but because they're having to get used to using their current abilities and techniques in these new bodies, different bodies, basically. So you're having Goku is having trouble flying. Vegeta's having trouble flying. Piccolo's having trouble flying. And they're having to kind of relearn some things. So in that way, technically, yes, that would make them less threatening if they can't do everything they could do before. And this is something that they've established in Dragon Ball. I mean, it's been well established that if you're in a different body, things aren't going to work the same. Okay, it happened with Captain Ginyu and Goku in Dragon Ball Z, when Captain Ginyu switched bodies with Goku, and all of a sudden he was trying to do all this stuff, but it didn't work because he didn't know Goku's body that well. It also happened with Goku Black, right? That was just Zamasu in Goku's body. And I believe that they made a point of that in Super at some point to kind of mention, hey, like, that's Goku's body, so you don't necessarily know how to use it properly. So they've already kind of established that this is a thing in that world to all of a sudden find yourself in a different body, different scenario, and have some trouble with that. So I think just by reiterating the fact that that is a thing in this world, they're making it a little bit more believable and a little bit more understandable how this villain might have thought turning them into kids made them less of a threat. Now, if we want to nitpick, we can go, we can say there's a lot of other wishes he could have made. I mean, he could have wished that he was stronger than all of them, right? I mean, remember when Frieza was trying to wish for immortality? There was no reason to think at that point that wasn't an actual wish that Shinran could have granted. Or sorry, I don't think it was Shinran. It might have been Purunga at that point when they were on Namek. But yeah, there's a million other wishes he could have made. But, they wanted to turn them back into kids. And whereas most of us probably weren't thrilled with that, they did it in a way that the best that they probably could with the shitty canon that had already been established before them. So I'm not gonna keep nitpicking the fact that they're kids. Would I would have preferred this? No, I think most of us wouldn't have preferred this, but this is what we have. So I'm just gonna go ahead and just accept it for what it is and just try to find some enjoyment in it. Because what else can I do at this point? Okay. So from this point on, it's just gonna be viewed from that perspective, and I'm gonna take it for what it is. And I have to say, I'm digging it so far, because whereas in Dragon Ball GT, it was only Goku, here, since it's all of them, they're all on equal playing field now, right? So that makes it feel a little bit better to me. And not to mention, it provides for a lighter sense of humor, tone, and so far I have to say I'm kind of, it's kind of refreshing in a way. Because this is definitely something we can say we haven't seen before, right? So they all decide to go up to Kami's lookout, or Dende's lookout, whatever you want to call it now, because they're trying to figure out what's going on. Supreme Kai, kind of has a bit of a sixth sense about some of this stuff, so they feel like the best thing to do is to go up there. Of course, none of them can really fly yet, but Kibito can still teleport, so they teleport. Mr. Popo is up there. He gives them the breakdown of the demon realm, and now things are starting to kind of come together for Supreme Kai. And I feel like they're honestly they're getting to the point relatively quickly here, which they need to do. If Dragon Ball Daima is only going to be 20 episodes, they can't mess around with this. So they're getting to the point and saying, hey, it doesn't take them long to realize that it's Supreme Kai's brother that's, involved here. And they're talking about the demon realm. And before you know it, we're already the plot is already starting to flow here. I mentioned this, I believe, on episode 0 of the podcast, where I was being asked, or maybe it was episode 1, where I was being asked about which character arc I was kind of more excited about in terms of some of the characters here. And one of those, I think I mentioned Degasu. Sorry, I'll get it. Degasu. But more so because I was interested in finding out more about Supreme Kai through there. Listen, Supreme Kai has always had the potential to be a very, very cool character. I think he was a character that had a lot of hype around him when he first showed up, and I'm not sure that they ever quite delivered on that hype. Remember when Supreme Kai first showed up? Okay, he was all mysterious. He was at the World Tournament. He and Kibito. Piccolo was looking at him like, uh-oh, like, who's this guy? Like, it's weird. Like, Piccolo didn't even want to fight him. The way he was talking was very, very cool. His character design, I feel like, is one of the best character designs on the show. I think he looks very, very awesome. But it didn't take long for us to realize that he wasn't, he wasn't that great. He didn't know anything. He thought he knew everything, but he knew nothing. He didn't even realize, he didn't know that there were mortals on Earth that were this strong. And that just made him seem very, very incompetent as a Supreme Kai. It's like, well, where the hell have you been, man? And what have you been doing this whole time? So my point is that there was a really big sale, not sale as in, the villain, but sale, S-E-L-L, that just didn't really pay off with Supreme Kai, that I hope they're going to pay off this time around. Because, like I said, I think the potential of him being an incredibly cool character is there and has always been there. And now, hopefully, we'll get a chance to really dive into that as we learn more about his family and, why he came to Earth to begin with, and Babidi and Boo and Dabura and all this stuff. Okay? It's already starting. We get to see the spaceship that he came to Earth in, as Kibito is able to just teleport to the supreme, the world of the Kais and get it. We're seeing a little bit. Their powers don't seem to be affected that much by being kids again. The Kais here, but maybe it's because they're Kais, and I'm willing to let that. Well, at least Supreme Kai is a Kai. I don't know what Kibito is technically. I mean, just an assistant of the Kai. But I'm willing to let that slide. Of course, there's a problem with the spaceship. They need the spaceship to go to the demon realm because they do make it clear that you can't just teleport there. And I like that because that'd be a very, very easy, way out. Like, our heroes need obstacles. In storytelling, you need obstacles to overcome. That's what makes the story interesting. You need conflict. And he has a ship, but, it doesn't work right now. It doesn't take long for them to fix it. I'll say that. But at least the writers thought ahead enough to be like, hey, if he had a ship, it'd probably be really old. And the chances of it working the very first time he tries it probably wouldn't come across very well. So let's at least introduce a conflict by saying they at least need to see if they can fix it. So we already know what's going to happen there. They're going to go get the chief briefs scientist herself, Bulma, to take a look at it. We get a very, very humorous scene shortly after that, in my opinion, where Goku tries to fly and he can't control it. And then Piccolo comes up and he's like, hurry up and figure out how to balance your new body. And Goku is like, well, you show me how it's done. So then Piccolo tries to fly. Piccolo tries to fly and he slams into a tree. Okay. And then there's this shot of him coming up and he's got a bloody nose. And hey, is this the first time we've seen blood in anything after Dragon Ball GT? Is this the first time of us seeing it? Because if this is a sign of things to come, then maybe we'll have some blood this series. Now, I'm sure the only reason why they're showing the blood is because it's purple, right? It's like, well, it's Piccolo. His blood isn't red, so we don't have to worry about the same, ratings that, this would get a completely different rating if they showed red blood. But since it's purple, they can get away with it. But I hope that maybe we'll get a little blood in Daima now. But I just thought that this scene was incredibly funny. So, I want to back up here and just say that, being that I've just accepted the fact that they're going to be kids for most of this series, there's no reason to sit back and be mad about that. There's no reason to sit back and hate on it. It is what it is. So I'm just going to judge the show based on what it is now, and that is them being kids. Is it still entertaining? Is it still making me laugh? Is it still a decent show? And I have to say, based on what I've seen so far, them being kids is very funny and interesting to me. So this is just episode 2 though. So it hasn't gotten cheap yet. It hasn't gotten stupid. It still feels like a very, very serious show, which I was honestly not expecting. For some reason, I thought that the second they turned into kids, that it was just going to be this really lighthearted romp where they weren't taking anything seriously. Tonally, it still feels like a very, very serious show with serious stakes. They're just kids, So that makes for a very interesting, I think, dynamic. So we get Bulma, and so I think we can pretty much assume that Goten and Trunks are going to be out of this because they're babies. And honestly, I'm not mad at it. I don't think we need Gotenks popping up in here, Gotenks just reminds us of a very, very poorly executed Buu saga, and Gotenks was very much a big part of why that saga just wasn't great. Conceptually, Gotenks just wasn't very good. Every time Gotenks showed up, it just felt like a completely different show. And now they've kind of eliminated the possibility of that by just taking Goten and Trunks out of the picture. So kind of, they're being faced with a new mission here. And the mission, honestly, right now seems to be a little bit less about them becoming adults again, because if they were super concerned about that, certainly there are other avenues they could have explored. I mean, I forget exactly what the state of the Dragon Balls on New Namek are. I don't know if that's a thing that exists yet. I forget in terms of the timeline. If that's even a thing, I forget. The continuity is so messed up and it's hard for me to remember all that stuff. But they certainly don't seem to be entirely concerned with the fact that they're kids, and the focus is more about, hey, look, we need to go rescue Dende. And I kind of like that. I like that they're making it about kind of going to get him back. We get a little bit of a side, little miniature, running joke here where Bulma's kind of bossing Kibito around and asking him to do a lot of stuff, which the way they keep showing it, we know that at some point that's going to become a problem for Kibito, because every time they show it, they kind of like zoom in on him a little bit. Of course, Bulma's going to be working on this ship, which, she shouldn't really know much about fixing. Yeah, she knows how to fix a lot of things, but this is a ship from a completely different planet, etc. So she's working on it. We get a little bit of a time passage completely in Japanese. So I can't tell you what it says because they didn't give us a subtitle for it. Maybe it says 2 days later, 2 weeks later. I don't know what it says. It's just a giant number 2 and some Japanese lettering. But we do spend some time with Goku where he's trying to relearn how to fight in his current body. So this tells us one thing for sure. If we're expecting Goku to go into this new adventure at full strength, well, that's not going to happen because they're setting the stage right now. They're telling us right now, hey, these characters are having to slowly relearn how to fight because now all of a sudden their range is different. Their strength is different because they have smaller bodies. They have to regulate their ki in different ways. And that is one thing I have to give the Dragon Ball world credit for, is that they've been pretty good of keeping track of that kind of stuff. And so the continuity there checks out. The fact that they're in smaller bodies, they wouldn't necessarily be able to do everything they were doing before. And, the history of Dragon Ball Z kind of supports that. So we get some backstory, we get some exposition here, which I'm okay with it in this scene. In the previous episode, it was all stuff we already knew, so it just felt really, really weird to just have them kind of recap everything in exposition. But here it's just telling a story, a backstory about the demon world, and our characters, our heroes, need to know this information too. So I'm okay with it, and they don't draw it out for too long. And then we get another scene of Kibito just being like, okay, Bulma's bossing me around here. What the hell's going on? So Goku starts to get, he at least gets his ability to fly back good enough to where he's able to fly to Korin's place. And before he goes to Korin, he mentions something about, I'm having trouble flying. So he says, I know what I need. So you would immediately assume that he's going to get what? Say it with me here, folks. Flying Nimbus, right? Another thing that's very, very much associated with Goku as a child, in addition to his power pole, is him riding on that cloud. But he goes to get the power pole instead. So I thought it was weird that they were talking about him flying and having trouble flying, and then his solution is to go get the power pole. It's like, well, why wouldn't the solution be to get Flying Nimbus? So I don't know. They could have done a better job of maybe kind of explaining why he felt like he needed the pole. Especially because when he leaves Korin's tower, Korin mentions Nimbus and he's like, no, I'll be good. I'm cool without it. And he just fucking leaves. It's like, okay. I mean, look, if we're going to go this far and have Goku as a kid again with Power Pole, why not just go ahead and give him Nimbus too? I'll tell you why. And I have a theory. My theory is that if you say Goku needs Nimbus to fly, then you have to explain the other characters not being able to fly or being able to fly, right? Because Goku has Nimbus, but what would Vegeta doesn't have a Nimbus. Piccolo doesn't have a Nimbus. So I think they just decided to say, hey, for the sake of not creating new problems here, with some characters being able to fly and some not, let's just make Goku not use Nimbus at all. Because like I said, if you make him need a cloud to be able to fly, then you got to give Vegeta a cloud. You got to give Piccolo a cloud too. And there's a version of that I actually wouldn't mind seeing. But, we got to get to the point here. So Goku finds out that the power pole is actually at Master Roshi's, and it is just being used to hang some clothes. So... yeah, it's just outside hanging on the clothesline. not all of this stuff is absolutely necessary to tell the story in this episode. There's little things like this that just kind of it's just kind of taking up space, like him having to go to multiple places to get the power pole. It's like, dude, we didn't even necessarily need to be able to see it, but I think we didn't need to see him go do it. He could have just left and came back with it, because it doesn't really advance the story at all to watch him go get it. But what it does is just provide maybe a few more opportunities for some humor to come in. So he goes back and they're all having dinner. And we get a cool little sequence of Goku and his Nyaibo, aka the power pole, again, showing it off, making that thing grow, getting really, really close to Piccolo's face. In another moment that I thought was pretty hilarious. So yeah, we get a bit of a nice little reunion with Goku and the power pole. So, once again, if it was just Goku, I think I'd feel differently about it. But I think the fact that they're all kids makes this a little bit more of an easier, swallow for me. Now, while they're all eating dinner, suddenly up in the sky, there's this little bright light that comes out. And if we remember what happened during the post-credit scene, or whatever you want to call it, of the previous episode, of course, this episode is named Glorio. So we still know at some point that there's a character named Glorio that's going to show up here. Now, I made the comparisons on the previous episode. This guy is immediately going to remind us of Future Trunks, right? And I don't think it's a coincidence. We've got this teenage sort of age guy that shows up in a spaceship. He's got interesting hair, check. He's got a long sleeve jacket on with a collar, check. He's got a unique weapon, check. It's not a sword, but it's a gun. And I think it's supposed to remind us of Future Trunks here. And who knows? Maybe, right now the sort of origin of who this guy is and what his actual identity is unknown. But he does mention the fact that I think he mentions that he's from the third demon world, which lets us know that the demon realm consists of multiple demon worlds. Okay, so they're fleshing out the universe, like I said before, fleshing it out. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if this kid is somehow, I don't know, maybe we might find out that he's, the future son of Supreme Kai or something. That'd be really on the nose with Future Trunks, but who knows? Maybe sometimes Dragon Ball gets really on the nose. But obviously there's a history here, and they're a little bit skeptical of him. Even Supreme Kai is like, well, wait a second. Like, if he just got here, how do you know who we are? How do you know? He doesn't seem surprised that we're kids already. So something's a little bit fishy here, which to me reminds me of how suspicious Piccolo and Vegeta were of Future Trunks when he first showed up. And we all know how that turned out. It ended up being Vegeta's son. So I don't know, but I will say this: I'm intrigued, and he's talking about the demon world and the demon realm, and they decided they need to go, and of course, and also a lot like Future Trunks, this character Glorio already knows who Goku is, and he came back to basically get Goku and say, "Hey, you're Goku, aren't you? Okay, when was the last time we heard that? Future Trunks, right?" And he's saying, "I need you to come with me." So, it doesn't take much convincing here, but yeah, they're gonna head on off, and they're gonna head over to the demon world with Glorio as their tour guide / chaperone. But before that, Bulma does, and I actually like the fact that they did this. I like that Bulma went and looked at his ship and used what he learned about, and she used what she learned about that ship to be able to go and repair Supreme Kai's ship, or at least that's what we're going to be led to sort of believe here, right? And those are the little details that help make this stuff flow a little bit better, because if not, there'd be a lot of more gaping holes in the story here. We don't need any more plot holes. So they're saying, okay, is it believable that Bulma can fix this ship? Maybe, kind of, sort of. But now is it believable now that she was able to see a very, very similar ship first and then take that knowledge to go repair the other one? Sure. But of course, this ship is very, very small, so only so many of them can fit in it right now. So we're definitely going to just get Glorio, Supreme Kai, and Goku going. And I feel very confident that later on, once Supreme Kai's ship is fixed, Vegeta, Piccolo, and whoever else will be able to join in on that. And that's pretty much where the episode ends. So I got to say this. I'm interested right now. We're 2 episodes into this show. This is interesting. I wasn't sure how I was going to feel about our characters, the heroes, being turned into kids just yet, but I'm liking it because their personalities are largely the same. Honestly, Goku doesn't change at all because he pretty much acts like this anyway, even as an adult. And it's fun watching a little mad Vegeta and a little, stubborn Piccolo. So I think I'm going to be very, very, very cautiously optimistic about this. And I'm just going to hope that they just launch into a very, very interesting adventure as these little versions of themselves, because why not? I mean, honestly, it just kind of feels like one of the video games where, there's just like a little fun little side story where they all get turned into kids, and that's exactly what this is. Except it's an actual anime and it's an actual show that they produce and put a lot of money into. And so far, so good. So I don't know, guys. What do you think about that? What are you saying? Send me an email at rockthedragonpodcast@gmail.com. And I will read your thoughts on the podcast. And also, if you want to leave a comment on this specific episode, giving your quick thoughts, you can do that as well. I may or may not read those. Like I said, I'm not sure yet. Just depends on what you say in them. But by all means, jump down, leave a comment, check for a poll. I may post one. I'm not sure yet because I don't know. These are things that I usually get an idea for after the fact. So maybe there'll be a poll there and you can participate in it there as well if you're the kind of person that wants to say something but doesn't necessarily want to send in an email, leave a comment, okay? So I just want to take a moment to remind you guys that if you're enjoying what you're listening to here, please give me a rating on Spotify, 5 stars. Please take a moment to head over to Apple Podcasts and leave a review over there. And share it. Talk about it with your friends. Follow me on Instagram, instagram.com/rockthedragonpodcast. Or if you're on Instagram already, you can just look up Rock the Dragon Podcast. Okay. There's once again, I introduced sort of a video element to this. You can find the YouTube channel as well, Rock the Dragon Podcast on YouTube. Some of those videos will be shared over there. And I will be continuing to share more things to try to spread the word about the podcast and hopefully get some more conversation going with you guys regarding Dragon Ball Daima. I just want to thank you for everyone that has come over from the previous podcast to this one, for your support, for your love, especially those of you that have taken a moment already to leave me reviews. This podcast is off to a pretty good start. If we continue on this path, maybe we'll make it through the entire series. Who knows? Okay. So with that being said, guys, that's about all I have for this episode. So for this episode of Rock the Dragon and Dragon Ball Daima podcast, I'm Tim Bridgewater. I will see you guys next time, and keep on rocking the dragon.